All right. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Krista Oldham, and I will be your Zoom host. We also have Babette Perkins, who is our co-host as well. Our presenter will get started shortly. This is a reminder to keep yourself muted throughout the presentation unless the presenter indicates otherwise. I think Mark has maybe some questions he'll be posing to the audience, so you can unmute yourself then. If you have any questions, please use the raise hand feature, which is located in the reactions icon, or type your question in the chat box. We will do a question and answer after the presentation. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the conference. Live transcription has been enabled. You can turn it on using the live transcript feature. You can change the view by clicking on the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We recommend the speaker view. At the close of the presentation, I will be putting an assessment survey in the chat box. Please fill out that survey for each session that you attend. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker. Mark is in his 10th year in education and coincidentally his 10th year as a librarian. Currently, he is the outreach and instruction librarian at Cornett Library and West Texas A&M University. Before coming to Cornett Library, he was a librarian for the Amarillo Public Library. And before that, he taught English language arts to 6th graders at Travis Middle School in Amarillo ISD. Before becoming a teacher, Mark walked the very odd road of someone who didn't know what they wanted to do when they grew up, which means he's built a ton of stories, everything from becoming an Eagle Scout to being a forklift driver to sharing with anyone who's interested. It also means he's picked up a bunch of odd habits. He enjoys a little bit of everything, including collecting high-end fountain pens, cycling, powerlifting, riding, video gaming, and playing with his two daughters, both of whom have him wrapped securely around their little fingers. Mark loves bringing his unique perspective to bear on many challenges facing librarians and librarianship. And he doesn't view himself as your average librarian, but that is okay because we aren't living in average times. And now I will turn it over to Mark to start his presentation.
So, hello, everybody. Like Krista said, my name is Mark McKnight. I am the Outreach and Instruction Librarian at Cornett Library. Cornett Library, for those of you that don't know, is at West Texas A&M University in Canyon, Texas. I did want to make one small correction to my introduction that I forgot to change. I'm actually just in my 7th year as a librarian, but in my 10th year in education overall. Okay. So welcome to my presentation, Someday Never Comes, How to Use Authority to Combat Imposter Syndrome. Here we go. Okay. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, then I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, then I'm going to give you my take on what authority is. Next, I'm going to show you a tool I think that you could use to combat imposter syndrome when you feel it or when you see others who are suffering from it. Throughout the presentation, like Krista said, I will be asking a few questions of the audience. When I do, feel free to unmute and weigh in. You don't have to answer this question, though, out loud. While I'm covering this, I want you to keep this question in mind. What advice were you given to help you deal with imposter syndrome? Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're going through all of this. So I've been a librarian for 7 years now and 4 years as an academic librarian. And before that, I was a public librarian at Amarillo Public Library. Before that, I was a teacher at Amarillo Independent School District for 3 years. So I've been in education, like we said a little bit before, for about 10 years. There were a couple of reasons why I began looking into this topic. One reason is I wrote an essay about authority that some people, when they read it, found very comforting. I'll go into this in greater detail later on in the presentation. The second reason I created this presentation is that I deal with imposter syndrome. Now, before you say, but you seem so confident. I know this is actually a carefully curated persona from my days as a teacher. What you're seeing right now is a coping mechanism born out of my imposter syndrome. I'll talk a little more about that later on in the presentation as well. Speaking to that, though, I actually had an attack of imposter syndrome while I was creating this presentation. For a while, I thought I didn't know enough about authority to talk about it. I thought I was going to look foolish getting up here and talking about this. So much so that I actually used the tool I'm going to show you later on in the presentation to help me get through it and build this presentation. So one could say I'm an expert on imposter syndrome because I live with it. Now you know a little bit about me. Let's hop into the presentation proper. So we're going to talk about imposter syndrome and how you can combat it using the information piece known as authority. Let's talk for a moment about what imposter syndrome is. To do this, I'd like to introduce you to the character of Marf. Marf is a smart guy, relatively. He's just graduated college and been hired to be a middle school teacher. He's excited and he feels ready to take on the challenges of this new profession. On top of that, the people around him are excited to have him on the team. They've told him in no uncertain terms that they expect great things from him. But Marf is not scared. He breezed through school. This next chapter in his life should be easy too. First day comes and goes, no problem. First week goes by, and administration has been dropping by periodically to check on him and believes everything is going great. Marf on the surface is great. He's seemingly happy. He hasn't really had a chance to breathe yet, but he's okay. Second week goes by, and he still hasn't had time to breathe. He's not getting much sleep either, but he's coping, mostly. He's getting through the lessons, and his students seem to be learning. All the administrators have been to his room and have said he's doing pretty well. They've given him a list of things to work on, but nothing major is wrong yet. He takes this list home and he ponders over it because he wants to be the best teacher that he could be, but he can't figure out exactly what to do about those things that he needs to fix. This is where the schism starts. Marf thinks he's a smart guy and that he should be able to figure this out. Admin also believes he's capable of figuring this out on his own. That and they're busy. You see, Marf got hired on in a school that had real issues with the statewide testing the year before. So admin doesn't have time to hold his hand. They need him to be on top of this right now. In fact, they've told him they need him to be the equivalent of a fifth-year teacher right now. Well, that's a problem because he doesn't know how to be a first-year teacher, let alone a fifth-year teacher. Another couple of weeks go by and things haven't really changed. Marf is beginning to think he's not as smart as he thought he was, and admin is still on him to fix these small issues before they become big issues. Marf, in a fit of desperation, goes to a colleague and he asks for help. He's given two pieces of advice. The first one is incredibly common. I feel like everyone gets this advice at some point in their life. Does anyone want to take a shot at what that is? Feel free to unmute yourself if you think you have the answer.
Fake it till you make it, maybe?
Fake it till you make it. Marf goes back to his classroom after being given this piece of advice, and he sits at his desk and he stares out the window, not knowing what to do, because he has no clue what that even means. Is he supposed to imitate other teachers? Is he just supposed to act like he knows what he's doing? Is he supposed to do like they do in the movies? On top of that, how long is he supposed to fake it? Does anyone know when he'll make it? What happens if he never makes it? Is he just supposed to feel like this forever? Because that sounds like a very special kind of hell to him. So he sat and waited for his next class to start, having no clue or no idea what to do. The other piece of advice, because I said he got two pieces of advice from this person, was to just be yourself, because no one knows what you don't know. Now, Marv knew this person meant well, and they were probably just parroting advice that was once given to them. But that second piece of advice just compounded the problem. Because being himself, which was what he was already doing, wasn't working. So Marv was left stuck in the same place. And as you can imagine, things spiraled. Marv felt stupid. Marv felt lost. For the next several weeks that stretched into months, Marv jumped every time the door to his room opened, because he just knew that was going to be the time admin came to tell him that they'd figured out he was a fraud and he needed to leave before he did any more damage to his students. He went into survival mode, just trying to get by one day at a time. His blood pressure went through the roof. He gained a lot of weight. He wasn't sleeping. He developed several facial tics. And his wife told him he wasn't a very good person to be around. All in all, it was a very dark time in his life. I'm sorry. I know that story isn't happy, but it is the best way that I know how to describe imposter syndrome. There's a lot of fear and helplessness, and you have no idea how to dig yourself out of that hole. So I would like to ask, are there any other emotions that you associate with imposter syndrome? You feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything you'd like to add.
Feeling incompetent.
Feeling incompetent. Yeah, that's a good one. Feeling lost, I see in the chat.
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. That's a good one. Okay. Not belonging. That's another really good one. Inadequate. Okay. Worthless. That's a really good one. Marv, I can tell you Marv felt that one. Okay. So before we get into what I think we should do about this, I want to say, I don't think the solution is to teach the person who's suffering from imposter syndrome more stuff or new techniques to handle this. I don't think it's a knowledge gap. I think it's a perception gap. There is a gap between who the person perceives themselves as versus who they really are. Now let's talk for a moment about authority. A quick moment about the ACRL framework. For this next portion of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about the information literacy concepts as outlined by the ACRL framework. The ACRL, or the Association of College and Research Librarians, has put together 6 concepts or frames that make up what they believe is the whole of information literacy. I'm going to be talking about the frame authority is constructed and contextual. So now let's talk about my thoughts on authority. A little over a year ago, I was asked to work on another presentation. When doing the research for that, I came across the use of authority as a way to determine if something on the internet was valid or not. For lack of better language to describe it, I became obsessed with that concept. More specifically, I became obsessed with the timing of authority. I wanted to answer the question, when do you become an authority on a topic? I really struggled with this question for months. So I did what anyone would do in that scenario. I wrote an essay about it. While I was writing that essay, I realized a few things regarding the topic of authority. One, there is a difference between an and the. Two, we become an authority relatively early in the education process. And three, we are obsessed with being the authority. So I wrote an essay about the topic where I talked about my thoughts regarding each of these points. Then I started sharing it with the people I work with, and an interesting thing happened. Several of the people I showed the article to told me these were comforting concepts to them. In fact, one of them told me it helped her realize she was okay with where she was in her educational journey. I was shocked, truth be told, because I didn't write the essay as something to comfort others. I was just trying to get my thoughts on paper. So now I want to talk in more detail about the three revelations that I had. First, there's a difference between an and the. Because authority is contextual. The authority on any given topic is the person in the room who knows the most about a topic. That changes depending on who is in the room at any given time. But here's the thing no one talks about, and something I think you need to remember. Just because there is someone in the room who knows more about a topic than you do, and is therefore the authority, doesn't mean that you lose what authority you have on the topic. As an example, I took physics in high school. I know a little, frighteningly little. I mean, there's a reason I became a librarian. But if you stick me in a room with just my two daughters, 2 and 7 respectively, who know absolutely nothing about the topic, just ask Lucy, the 2-year-old. She has not figured out that gravity actually works. She falls off the couch all the time. I am suddenly the authority on the topic. That's kind of a frightening concept. However, as soon as my wife walks in, she becomes the authority in the room because she uses physics every single day for what she does for a living. But I'm still an authority, at least a little bit, even when my wife is in the room. Just because someone knows more about a topic doesn't mean you lose what you know. This holds true even if magically Stephen Hawking was to come into the room. Obviously, he becomes the authority with regards to physics. But again, I don't lose what little I know on the topic. Now, obviously, this is an extreme example. And in this situation, I would probably just listen to what Hawking had to say. But the fact remains, I'm still, in some very small way, an authority. This takes me to the second revelation. You become an authority on something pretty early in the educational process or in the educational journey for our purposes. This is especially true if you're around people who aren't learning the same things that you are. You develop your personal authority when you do anything to learn about your topic. So going to a class, reading, and talking to someone who knows more about the topic all help you build your authority. So I'd like you to think of authority this way. It's easy to learn, but it's hard to master. Or I suppose more specifically, it takes little time to become an authority, but a long time to become the authority. I was actually really kind of hoping that last line would come out a little more sage-like, but oh well. So the third revelation that I had that I want to talk to you about is we are obsessed with being the authority. We worry about being the authority, or we're afraid of not being the authority. It's almost like we need permission to not be the top authority in the room. So here's me giving you permission not to be the authority. More importantly, I think here is me giving you permission to enjoy being simply an authority. I say that because I don't know about y'all, but I like the adventure of learning something new. I like reveling in the process of learning something new, and I would like for all of you to drop the pressure associated with having to know everything about a topic from the outset. So, now that we've talked about the three things that I believe about authority, how can we take these revelations and use them to combat imposter syndrome? Remember, I said I don't think our problem is a perception gap. All right, I think our problem is a perception gap, not a knowledge gap. Sorry. I don't think it does us any good to teach the person suffering from imposter syndrome new things. Instead, I think we should be reminding them of all the things they already know. We're going to do this by taking an inventory of authority. So, I would like everybody, if you have the handout for this, you can just use the handout that was attached to this, or you can grab a blank piece of paper. I should have told you that you need a blank piece of paper before we got started. And I'm just going to divide my paper. I'm just going to fold my paper kind of like a brochure or a pamphlet into thirds. So it looks a little something like this whenever it gets opened up. Can everybody see my camera? Maybe. Okay. So you're just going to divide it, or you could take a pen and just divide it really quickly into three different sections after you've turned the paper sideways. Okay. The first section on this piece of paper is for your education. I'd like everybody to kind of go along with us while I'm doing this, and I'll fill out one of these inventories of authority with you as well. So this first section is for your education. Much like a resume, you're going to put on here your formal education, all of it. Anything you studied before you became a librarian, or in the process of becoming a librarian. Those are important pieces of your authority. I'll give you about a minute to complete that. And I'm going to go ahead and do it while we're waiting as well. So I'm going to put on here that I've got a bachelor's in English. I've got my master's in library science. I've also got several certifications to teach. Yeah. Okay. The next section is for your professional highlights. This is the middle column of the piece of paper. This is for professional highlights. This is where you're going to write out all of the things that you've done while working in the library profession. These don't have to be big things. They can be as small as helping a patron in a way that you're particularly proud of. I'll give you some time to complete that. For me, I'm going to put on there, I presented at TLA. I'm going to put on there that I presented at the virtual library conference. This is a highlight for me. And that I wrote an essay that is being considered for publication. Oh, I'm also going to put on there that I was in charge of the board game room for the Amarillo Comic-Con whenever I was a librarian for the public library. Okay. Give you a couple more seconds to do that one, and then we'll move on. No, I don't think it's a bad sign that this column is hard for you. I only have a couple of things. You don't have to have just a ton of stuff in there. Especially not if you're just starting your career. Okay, let's move on to the third column. This is where you're going to put this last column, this last section is for personal experience. This is where you're going to put the things that you did before you became a librarian, or the things that you do now in your personal life that are like hobbies or side projects, just things that you are very passionate about and that you know a lot about. So I'm going to give you a moment to fill that in. For me, I think I'm going to put on here that I worked in retail, and that I have a fountain pen hobby that was mentioned earlier. I also love to ride my bike everywhere. Ooh, and then I was a Boy Scout whenever I was growing up. Another minute or so to fill that one in. And again, these don't have to be extensive. And I am a father. Thank you, Kara, for reminding me of that. Okay. So now you might be curious why I think your inventory of authority should include each of these things. Well, actually, it's probably obvious why the first two columns are there. They remind you of what you've done to earn your spot at the table. You need to remember all of the things that you've learned and done along the way to get where you are professionally. And again, all of this stuff makes you at least an authority in this field. But you might be thinking, all right, so I've earned my spot at the table, but I don't know any more than the person sitting next to me. Well, you'd be right. If you were only to look at the first two columns on any person's paper here, you would probably see very similar things. You know, we've all, well, a good chunk of us have gotten higher education degrees. A good chunk of us have done, you know, been involved in presentations or done things like that. So we're going to have pretty similar experiences or things that get placed in those first two columns. This is where the personal experience comes into play. See, if the education and professional highlight sections make up an outline of who you are, then the personal section colors that outline in. Okay, it informs how we address the problems that we face each day. It details the way we use the things we learned that we put in the first two columns. So the first two columns provide you with a seat at the table, and the third column informs how you're going to address the problems that get brought up in the conversation. So why are the differences important? I'm going to pull from another frame in the ACRL framework here. Scholarship is conversation. Tells us that we are partaking in scholarship, or when we're partaking in scholarship, we're adding to the professional conversation. But it also tells us that we are supposed to look for solutions to issues in unique places. The things you list in your personal experience column, in some ways, are the most important piece to this, because it gives you a perspective unlike anybody else in the space. So when you're struggling with whether you should say something or whether you have something to say at all, I hope this tool helps remind you that the answer to that question is yes. Always yes. Now let's talk for a moment about solutions. I'm not claiming that this inventory of authority is a permanent solution to imposter syndrome. I don't think there is a permanent solution to imposter syndrome, because it's going to pop up every time you take on a new responsibility or change positions or move to a new library. It's always going to be there waiting for you to change something so it can leap in and tell you you aren't good enough. I do think developing a routine where you every so often sit down and take an inventory of your authority can help to remind you that voice in your head isn't speaking the truth. Also, keep your latest inventory handy so you can glance at it every now and then, just to remind you that you have earned your spot at the table and you do have something to say and you are worth listening to. On that topic, I would like to take a moment to talk to people who have been in the profession for a while and who maybe don't deal with imposter syndrome as often as they used to. This is not to say that you don't deal with it at all. I think anytime you make a change to your position or you move, there is the possibility of having an attack. But you are also the people who will probably be running the next piece that I'm going to be talking about wherever you are at. These are the conversations that happen in meetings. So I mentioned earlier that the conversations we have are important for a couple of reasons. One of the ACRL framework, Scholarship is Conversation, tells us that, again, we should be looking for answers to these problems we face in unique places. And we find those unique places through conversations. So to help with that, I wanted to throw out some pointers to help facilitate those conversations and maybe help some people who are dealing with imposter syndrome speak up in those conversations and meetings. So I have, over the next couple of slides, 3 things you can do to help out people who are dealing with imposter syndrome and help them speak up in meetings. Each of these is something that you can do to facilitate better conversations in meetings. And then under each of these tips, I have next steps that you can take to help someone dealing with imposter syndrome fight against it. So the first one, create an inclusive and open environment. Foster an environment in your workspace that values diverse perspectives and opinions. So you can do this by using active listening exercises like pair share or listen and summarize. You could also consider anonymous idea generation tools like Padlet, but you don't have to get technical if you don't want to. You can use something as simple as a sticky note. And last, you could incorporate mind mapping or affinity diagramming into your meetings as a way for people to organize their thoughts about a topic before sharing what they've thought. Next steps for this would be to actively listen to whoever is speaking in your meeting. Provide cues that you are listening to what they are saying, like nodding or acknowledging that you've heard them. And the last next step is set ground rules for respected communication before the meeting even starts. Make it very clear that you're respecting everybody's opinion and everybody's perspective, and that you have and have very clear ground rules for what that means in your meetings. The second tip is to provide structure to your meetings. Structure your conversations and meetings by setting clear objectives and agendas, and then send these out to the people who will be attending the meeting so that they can actively prepare for what will be talked about in that meeting. Then stick to the agenda and the objective. My boss does a fantastic job of doing this. Before every single meeting that I have with her, she sends me the agenda and she sticks to it religiously. It is pretty amazing, and it does a fantastic job of helping me figure out what I need to have in place in order to successfully go through that meeting. The next steps for this one are, after the meeting, have a support network in place, either by encouraging conversations with trusted peers or through an official mentorship and coaching program in your organization, so that colleagues can provide encouragement and reassurance to those who might be dealing with imposter syndrome. Regular conversations with trusted peers can create a safe space to discuss challenges, seek advice, and receive support. The third tip is to summarize and synthesize after a discussion. Summarize the key points and takeaways of the discussion to ensure everyone is on the same page with what was discussed in the meeting. The next step for this would be to provide constructive feedback to newer employees to highlight their valuable contributions to conversations. You can critique, but remember to celebrate the successes of them speaking up in a meeting and having something good to say. This last one was a really big one for me. We have an assessment committee here at Cornet Library, like I'm sure many libraries have, and I am on that committee. I've been on this committee for a while and have struggled to add anything to the conversation when we have our meetings. That is until a few sessions ago, I had a breakthrough and actually began talking and adding to the conversation in that meeting in a meaningful way. This was a big enough deal for me that I actually mentioned it to my boss as an accomplishment I was particularly proud of for that week. That now gets listed in my professional highlights column of the authority inventory for me. So these are all the tips I have for helping you have better conversations and meetings in your space. I hope these help you, help those around you dealing with imposter syndrome. So now let's revisit Marf. You may be wondering what happened to him. Well, unfortunately, he didn't last long as a teacher. That doesn't mean he didn't make an impact, however. You see, in the absence of any clear path forward, he reverted subconsciously to what he knew, to what he'd been taught about teaching in school. Mostly, though, he did what he personally did best. He taught by telling stories. He found out very quickly that he could keep his students entertained and engaged as long as he could relate what they were learning through a story. Unfortunately, though, for the entire time that he taught, he was constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for admin to tell him he'd been found out and it was time to leave. He didn't even realize he was doing an okay job until years later, when he began seeing ex-students out in the wild, and they told him the impact he had on them, and that they remembered the stories he told them, and that those stories, for many of them, were their favorite part of the day. I oftentimes wonder what might have happened had Marf had the tools he has now to consciously remind himself of the authority he's created for himself. Or if the people around him had constructive conversations with him that helped affirm and remind him that he'd earned his seat at the table, helping him understand that there was a reason in the first place that he was hired for that position. Thank you all for attending my presentation on how you can give authority or how you can use authority to combat imposter syndrome. I hope this gives you some ideas to help the Marfs you work with. Or if you happen to be a Marf, I hope this helps you deal with your imposter syndrome when it rears its ugly head. What questions do you have for me? I'm gonna stop the screen share now. Here we go, stop share. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or to just unmute yourself and ask them. Oh, thank you, Eliana. And thank you, Annie. I appreciate that. Oh, and Chelsea. Thank you. So if there are no questions, I actually have a question for the audience. Does anyone want to share how they felt while they were working through the inventory of authority? Oh, okay, never mind. I'm sorry. There was a question. Even if you recognize you are an authority, how do you deal with the feeling that you need to be more all of the time? So whenever I do the inventory of authority for myself, it helps me to understand that I don't need to be more. It helps me understand that I am enough. I don't know if I have it. Well, and that may be a conversation that you need to have with the people around you or your boss, and just let them know, hey, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And maybe it's a conversation about like all of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, and whether or not, things need to be removed from your plate or something like that. Does that help?
Yeah, Mark, while you were speaking and thinking about, the question that came up in the chat, and Mark, the question that you had posed to us, how did you feel about doing I can't remember the exercise, but the three-folded paper thing, once you start listing the things, right? Like your education, your accomplishments, who you are as, an individual. I think too many times we don't pat ourselves on the back, and it's so easy to discard all of those great things that we have accomplished in our life and who we are as people. And I think one of the things that we struggle with, and this is my personal opinion, just kind of we live in a culture that constantly wants to innovate, that's constantly kind of pushing, being thrown at us to improve yourself or be something more, do something more. And we don't have the time to kind of sit and celebrate a lot of our accomplishments. So I think we're in many ways, battling something that is just a culture around service professions of like constant improvement. So that's something that kind of came to mind.
Yeah, I agree. That is definitely a culture that we live in. And it's part of the reason why I came up with the inventory of authority, because I wanted a tool that could remind you of all of the things that you've done. So it's sort of like a miniature celebration, but I also wanted something that's very quick to do. So you can sit down and you can do a really quick inventory of authority in like 5 to 10 minutes and have a pretty decent list. And you can get an even longer list, the more you practice with it. And it's just a really quick way to remind you, hey, I know some stuff. And I'm again, I've earned my spot in this space. So yeah. What other exercises? Honestly, Eliana, I don't know if I have any other exercises. I'm sorry to say that. And when I was beginning work on this presentation, there's not a whole lot in this space or in this area to help work through that. I know that's not the answer that you wanted. I'm sorry.
Mark, you write a lot, so do you do a lot of journaling? I wonder if that's a
yes, I do. I do a ton of journaling. In fact, I have a really nice journal, and there's one of my really nice fancy fountain pens. There are 4 books in here, and one of them is completely dedicated to my journal, and another one is completely dedicated to accomplishments that I've done throughout. So like I'll sit down and today at the end of the day, I'll write out a couple of things that I did that I'm proud of. So maybe that's an exercise to help combat your imposter syndrome. That way you can flip back through and see all of the things that you've done and that you're proud of. Mentors, that's a really good one, Nancy. Mentors are someone that you can talk to your career working, supervising in general. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Eliana. Mary says, I've been in the library profession for almost 35 years and I still have imposter syndrome. Wow. Thank you for sharing, Mary. I have to remind myself that I've earned my place and that I know things. Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, I don't think that this is a permanent solution. But I definitely think that it's something that can help in the moment, kind of like an asthma inhaler. And like I said, but I had an attack of imposter syndrome as I was putting this presentation together, because I put in the proposal and then I got approved, and then I thought, oh, now I have to do this. And then and I kind of freaked out a little bit because I thought, oh no, I don't know if I know enough about authority to actually talk about this. And then so I sat down and wrote this out and reminded myself, yeah, I do. Thought journals, self-care throughout the day. When you feel overwhelmed or frustrated, stop. Very good answer, Nancy. Thank you. So just like Babette said, we've got 3 minutes. Thank you for putting the survey in there, Babette. I appreciate that.
I was also going to say, Mark, that to everybody, when you're in a meeting, don't be afraid to ask questions. Just get over that fact real quick, because you never know what piece of information you're going to pick up from asking that question that will stick with you, or, that I know they always tell you in college, everybody in the room probably has this question. Just ask it. Don't be afraid.
I think that's, yeah, definitely a good way to look at it. Definitely a good thing to keep in mind. Maybe I should keep my resume handy to read over. That's not a bad idea either, Susan.
I think we should also remember that it happens at all levels, because I had an administrator one time tell me that there was someone new coming on to the administrative team, and they mentioned, catch that person early on while they feel like a fraud. So basically they were saying that, even at that administrative level, they're in a new job, everything feels new. So I think we should remind ourselves of that as well.
Awesome. Well, with that kind of closing advice, we're going to wrap up this session. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Babette had already placed it in the chat, but I'm going to place it in there again. Please fill out this assessment survey. Let us know how you thought the presentation went, what you liked, what you didn't. We look forward to hearing from you, and please continue to engage with the rest of the conference. And another virtual round of applause for Mark and his presentation.
Thank you all. So
Yay!
really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Have a good rest of your